Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. This is going to be a tutorial on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but it's going to be specifically for players that have never played a role-playing game before, that want to give it a shot, and that might be a little bit intimidated by how weird and complex the game can seem. Role-playing games in general can kind of seem crazy. You see people in costumes doing funny voices with tons of different sheets of information in front of them, memorizing thousands of pages of complex rule books with all these weird dice. What does it all mean? Dungeons & Dragons does not need to be played like that, nor does any role-playing game system. It can be very simple, and it can be some of the most fun that you'll ever have playing a game with your friends. You do not need to go out and buy all the complex advanced rulebooks. You don't even need to buy the basic rulebooks. You don't really need to buy anything. They're completely free online from the company that publishes them, Wizards of the Coast. But I would say you don't even need that. You need a basic understanding of how the game works, which I will give you. You need a pen or a pencil and some scrap paper, whether it be a cheap, 80-cent notebook from your local office supply store, or something fancier like this, which is a leather-bound, metal-clad journal, which is entirely unnecessary. Any paper will do, any writing utensil will do. And then you need some dice. You can go with physical dice, which obviously most people prefer because they're a lot of fun to roll, or you can go with a dice app on your phone, which actually rolls dice for you. The reason that you need the dice is because that pretty much randomizes the gameplay. That's what makes the game work. That's what lets you know when you swing a sword, did the sword hit the enemy? When you fire a bow and arrow, does the arrow strike where you were aiming? When you try to climb up a rock wall, do you fall and break your ankle, or do you make it to the top and get into the castle? That's all decided randomly using dice, which is why the dice are important. And they're a lot of fun to roll physically, so I would say pick up a set. They cost $5 to $10. You can get them at pretty much any store nowadays. If you go to a gaming store or a comic book store, they're definitely going to have them, but I've even seen them at stores like Target and Walmart in the board games section. So, getting into how the game actually works, you've got two types of player. You've got the Dungeon Master, or DM for short. That's the person telling the story. And then you've got the players who control the characters, and those are the characters in the story. So if you think of it like a movie, you've got the actors, and then you've got the sort of director who's putting the story out there. The stories don't have to be elaborate, they don't have to be intricate. Obviously, once you get a little more experience to playing the game, you can come up with very intricate, complex stories that span dozens of games, hours at a time, and you can come up with all of these side characters and quests and missions. You can do all of that. But to start, you can go with something really simple. Same thing with your players' characters. They're each going to come up with a unique character. They can even copy characters that they like. If somebody wants to play Geralt from The Witcher, they can do that. Just obviously try to give them a different name and maybe put a little bit of a spin on it so it's not so obvious. Or they can come up with something from scratch. But pretty much everybody already knows the types of characters that you can play in Dungeons & Dragons on some level. Wizards, sorcerers, knights, paladins, clerics. You've seen them in all kinds of games, so you probably already know what they are and what they do. You just come up with it. Give them a name. Give them some physical description. What can they do? Do they fight with a sword? Do they use a bow? Do they use heavy armor? Do they cast spells? Just give it some basics. Once you get into the books, when you're really into the game, there's a lot of intricacy and there's a lot of rules around who can do what, who can use what kind of spells and things like that. But to get started, you don't need to know that. As far as playing the game and using the dice, the most important die is going to be this 20-sided die right here. Now, you probably don't have one of these lying around your house. What you're going to want to pick up is a set of polyhedral dice. That's what these are called. It basically just means a collection of dice that aren't all six-sided. Most games that you've played, like board games, Monopoly, things like that, come with six-sided dice. They're little cubes. They have black dots on them that number 1 through 6. These dice have a different number of sides. So you've got a 6-sided die, but you also have a 4-sided die, you have an 8-sided die, you have two 10-sided die, you have a 12-sided die, and most importantly, you have a 20-sided die. The way the gameplay is going to work is as the Dungeon Master is explaining sort of the scene, the story, what's happening to the players who are controlling the characters, the players are going to respond by saying, I want my character to do this. If the Dungeon Master says a group of zombies jump out of the woods, the players are going to respond to that and say, oh, I want my character to swing at this one with a sword. And another player might say, I want my character to shoot an arrow at that one's head. And then the third player might say, I want to climb this tree because I don't have any weapons and I'd really rather just hide. And so the Dungeon Master, who is controlling everything except for the characters, you control the monsters, you control the people in the town, you control the weather, you control absolutely everything. The Dungeon Master is going to say, okay, well, the zombies aren't necessarily fast. So you swinging the sword, you're going to need to roll at least a 10 on this 20-sided die, and it's always a 20-sided die. The only thing the other dice are used for is for damage. So anytime a person is taking an action, whether it be combat or swimming, jumping, running, riding a horse, that's all a 20-sided die. So you would say, okay, you swinging the sword, zombies aren't very good at dodging, so let's say you need to roll a 10. A 10 is what's considered average. It's not too hard, it's not too easy. Then you with the bow and arrow. The zombies are missing a lot of flesh, and so it's a little easier for your arrow to slip right through them. So I'm going to say that you need to roll a 12, slightly higher than the person with the sword because it's a little harder to do what it is you're trying to do. And then the person who wants to climb the tree, well, you don't have any climbing gear and you're wearing all that heavy armor, so it's going to be very difficult to get up a tree. You need to roll a 15 and able to climb to be able to climb that tree. And so those three players are going to each roll a 20-sided die. And if they roll equal to or greater than the difficulty that you assigned them, a 10, a 12, and a 15, then they succeed at doing what they were trying to do. And if they roll under what you assigned to them for a difficulty, they failed to do what they're trying to do. The sword misses, the arrow misses, they slip and fall out of the tree. You can even say that if they fail very poorly, say for example they only roll a 1 or a 2, then maybe even there's a negative impact. You swing the sword and you roll so poorly that you actually slip and fall at the feet of the zombie who lunges at you. You fire the arrow and it actually slams into the ankle of the ally who's trying to climb the tree and they fall out of the tree. Or you try to climb the tree and as you slip and fall, you hit several branches on the way down and fracture your elbow. You can just come up with stuff on the spot like that. Try to be fair, try not to be too cruel about it, but that's the role of the Dungeon Master, to come up with the story, to add in little funny details like that. The other sort of important mechanic as far as using the 20-sided die, or the D20 as it's often referred to, is that you can add advantage or disadvantage. This has to do with whether or not the character trying to take the action is necessarily in a good or bad position to do what they're trying to do. So, a simple example is, are you drunk or are you magically enchanted? So say, for example, the character swinging the sword. Right before they wandered off into these woods to head back to their cabin for a good night's sleep, they were all drinking, and that character with the sword had a rough day and he had one too many. So now he goes to swing his sword and you say, well, hold on a minute, Frank, we'll call him Frank. Hold on a minute, Frank. You've been drinking pretty heavily. You pull your sword out and try to swing at that zombie and you feel those booze really kick in. You're going to say, I give you disadvantage. Disadvantage means when Frank rolls his 20-sided die to see whether or not he hits with his sword, he actually rolls the dice twice, and he has to keep the lower number. So say, same setup, you said, okay, to hit the zombie you need to roll a 10 with your sword. You have to roll this dice twice because you have disadvantage, and you have to take the lower number. So if he rolls a 13 and then a 6, sure, the 13 would have hit, but the 6 wouldn't. And disadvantage says you have to keep the lower number. So Frank just missed. Now, if, however, we switch over to, we'll say Mary, who is shooting the bow at the other zombie's head and needs a 12, maybe Mary has a magical elixir in her pocket, and she felt that something might have happened while they were going through these forests, so she took a little sip of that magical elixir to heighten her senses. When you get to Mary, you might say, okay, well, you need a 12 to shoot this zombie with your bow and arrow. However, because you're magically enhanced right now, I'll give you advantage. Advantage is the opposite of disadvantage. You roll the 20-sided dice twice, and you get to keep the higher number. So, needing a 12, maybe her first roll is only an 8, but then she rolls a second time because of advantage, and she gets a 17. Well, she gets to keep that 17, and now she's hit the zombie. So that's how advantage and disadvantage work. It's pretty straightforward. And if your players don't have any necessary advantages or disadvantages, just let them roll once like normal. The other dice that come in your set are all for damage. And as the GM, or the Dungeon Master, I should say, GM is short for Game Master, which is what you call this person, not in Dungeons & Dragons if you were playing a different role-playing game. The Dungeon Master should determine which die they use for damage based off of what it is they're doing the damage with. Are they swinging a tiny dagger? Well, that should probably be a 4-sided die. Are they swinging a short sword? Maybe that's a 6-sided die. Are they swinging a large axe? Maybe that's an 8-sided die. Are they swinging a huge battle hammer with 2 hands? Maybe that's a 10-sided die. Do they have an enchanted crossbow that's shooting flaming arrows? Well, maybe that's a 12-sided die. And you can come up with additional features to those as well. Maybe that flaming crossbow arrow sticks into the chest of a zombie and continues to burn him as the turn goes on. So maybe every time we get back to that zombie to see what that zombie does for an action, which is basically the Dungeon Master's turn, we roll a 4-sided die and we have the zombie take that much additional damage. How much damage does it take for a monster or an enemy to be killed? That's up to the Dungeon Master. Something as weak as a zombie? Maybe 5. Something like a massive dragon? Maybe 100. It's up to the Dungeon Master. Just try to keep things as even and fair as you can. If you wanted exact rules and details on these different monsters and creatures, there are plenty and plenty of books for that. But if you don't want to go out and memorize those and spend the money on those books right off the bat, just make it up as you go, and it's pretty much going to work out fine, I promise. As far as the paper and stuff goes, that's vital for the Dungeon Master. They can keep notes of what the players have done, where the players are going, different characters that the players have met. I can't tell you the number of times that I have my characters walk into a bar and, find out about a mission to go save somebody, and then they go wandering off into the woods, and then when they come back to town because they've saved the person, they go back to the bar to collect their money, and they say, who's the name of the person that we talked to last time? And I go, oh, I can't remember. It was Jim or James or John. I didn't write it down. Always write down your stuff as a Dungeon Master. It makes it much easier to come back to it later. It helps you keep track of what's going on. From a player's perspective, keep track of what you have. Keep track of your weapons. Keep track of items that you find. Keep track of gold that you have. If there are any spells that you learn, write those down. Write down what they do. If you want to have a spell and you don't feel like going through the rule books, explain to your Dungeon Master what kind of a spell you want to have, and your Dungeon Master will explain to you how that spell works. Okay, I want to be able to shoot a fireball. Okay, well, that's a little powerful. Let's say it's a fireball, but it only goes 20 feet. Okay, well, how much damage does it do? Well, let's say it does 1d6 or a 6-sided die of damage. Okay, well, what if I level up a few times? Okay, well, then we'll make it a 1d8 or an 8-sided die, and we'll say it goes an extra 10 feet, so it goes 30 feet now. That's fine. How do feet work? Well, when you're in combat, your Dungeon Master just tells you, okay, you're 50 feet away from that zombie. Okay, so I can't hit it with my fireball because my fireball only goes 20 feet. Okay, perfect. So first I'm going to run up, and then I'm going to throw my fireball. Okay, perfect. That's pretty much gameplay. You just kind of explain what you're doing back and forth. The Dungeon Master explains what's going on, and the characters, controlled by the players, explain how it is they want to react to what's going on. And then you roll your 20-sided die to see what you want, if what you want to do works or doesn't. And then if you do some damage, you roll the damage die. And that's pretty much gameplay. Once you play a few games like that, you'll know whether or not you like it. And you can jump into the rule books and you can spend a little bit more money and you can really go crazy with it. But other than that, that's pretty much how you play. So that's Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in a very, very tiny nutshell. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you haven't yet, go down below and subscribe. Make sure to set your notification bell to all. If you have time, leave a like or a dislike or maybe a comment, and I'll try to get back to you. And if you liked this video, let me know, and I can make more like it. There are plenty of other gaming systems like Dungeons & Dragons, some that are very different, some that are similar with a little bit of a flavor shift. Just let me know. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good night.